Trump does sound rich. It's almost onomatopoeic. Trump. One biographer found that a prescient ancestor had changed it from, and this is true, Drumpf. Yes. So if you are thinking of voting for Donald Trump, the charismatic guy promising to make America great again, stop and take a moment to imagine how you would feel if you just met a guy named Donald Drumpf.
In 2020, as a new presidential election approaches, Donald Trump is someone people feel as strongly about as ever. For some, he is someone that has been indefensible from the very beginning, a real estate mogul that is also a media magnate with no political background or diplomatic qualities whatsoever. Others say that an outsider is exactly the type of person needed to try to clean up Washington. He's been called an idiot and a genius on the left. And on the right, many view him with admiration or as a man with faults worth giving a shot. Many independently minded people like myself feel caught in a crossroads. With headlining stories before Donald Trump took office detailing how many people would need to die in a line of succession for an Obama-era cabinet member to be put in the Oval Office, out-of-context quotes taken from the very day of his announcement of his candidacy, and news article after news article with anonymous sources or falsified information, making claims that can't be corroborated on the record, trying to be objective and getting to the heart of the man and his policies feels like stepping into firing range. Politics in Washington may be crippled, but American discourse over national politics and issues feels like an exploding train wreck that is setting off a never-ending chain reaction of detonations. I have only tangentially followed presidents since Bill Clinton and turned 18 just before the 2004 presidential election. Amongst the presidents in power since that time, I do not recall a more emotional and visceral response to someone before they could even do anything yet. There were over 200 people arrested in violent protests at his inauguration. News networks even claimed that white people came out in droves to vote for Donald Trump, despite him carrying similar percentages of the vote across demographics compared to recent Republican candidates like Mitt Romney, and the percentage of voter turnout being similar to recent elections. Hello everyone, my name is Saint Stephen, and I did something for myself and for you, because I think it is important for the future of us. I put together a fairly comprehensive and compelling overview of the first 4 years of everyone's favorite self-tanned swamp buster, or orange tyrant, depending on who you ask. What this video aims to do is examine the Trump of the campaign trail in 2016 and go over the highlights of his time in office, both well-known and less known. I've taken more time to review the record than 99% of people out there, so you may learn things you didn't know and things you wouldn't want to know no matter who you are. I don't claim this list is entirely complete. A presidency is full of many actions, events, decisions, and controversies, and I'm sure some have happened even as I am making this video. But I'm willing to bet by the end of this video, you'll have a much more informed opinion as to whether or not Donald Trump's time in office has been a net positive. So join me as we look to answer the question, is Donald Trump a man with redeeming traits? Or is he a blubbering, egotistical madman, affectionately referred to by John Oliver as Donald Drumpf?
I am officially running for President of the United States.
Yes. Part 1. Where it all started. Sort of. All presidents have history before becoming political candidates, but this isn't a biography. Our first step into Trump's current political foray will examine contentious campaign statements and controversies during the 2016 presidential run to see what is true, what is exaggerated, and what is not. Past information and supplemental action from President Trump's time in office until now will be used to provide helpful contrast where necessary. Donald Trump made headlines right away when he announced he was running for office on June 16, 2015. Reports claimed he declared that Mexicans are rapists and criminals. Here's the quote in full.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting. And it only makes common sense. It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America, and it's coming probably from the Middle East. But we don't know, because we have no protection, and we have no competence. We don't know what's happening. And it's got to stop. And it's got to stop fast.
To take him at his word, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're bringing rapists, and he assumes some are good people. He talks to border guards and hears what we are getting and what they deal with. He uses this to pitch more security at the border, and speculates other countries are probably abusing US immigration as well. A select portion of this quote circulated on media a ton at the time, accusing Donald Trump of stating all Mexicans are rapists or criminals of some kind. Clearly, this moment was entirely misrepresented. If someone states crime is coming in from a lack of border security, and also says some of the people coming here are good people, that's not racism. The choice of words is loose, but they do address the concern over criminal activity surrounding the border and border security itself. At the Republican Jewish Coalition Forum in 2015, Donald Trump stated he had devoted much of his life to Israel and that he has done more than the vast majority of politicians. He would go on in his speech to describe different things he has been involved in and what he has donated his money to. He was criticized in this speech for stating he didn't want money from the crowd in attendance. Though taken as a slur by some news outlets, he also stated that he was funding his campaign on his own and complimented the crowd's ability to make deals, which is a Jewish stereotype. He also stated,
Obama is the worst thing that's ever happened to Israel. The worst. The worst.
While this is overwhelmingly factually untrue, his record is lukewarm, hallmarked with a final resolution via the UN at the end of his presidency, declaring Israeli settlement activities in East Jerusalem and occupied Palestinian territory illegal. The Republican Jewish Coalition Forum event is considered a campaign stop for many, so the event has had a history of politicians embellishing their connections or admiration of the Jewish people. Trump made headlines with the tweet featuring an image of a six-pointed star stating, "Most corrupt politician ever," in reference to Hillary Clinton. Here's a video of his campaign's response.
Says these false attacks by Hillary Clinton trying to link the Star of David with a basic star, often used by sheriffs who deal with criminals and criminal behavior, showing an inscription that says Crooked Hillary is the most corrupt candidate ever with anti-Semitism is ridiculous. Clinton, through her surrogates, is just trying to divert attention from the dishonest behavior of herself and her husband. The real questions are, why was Bill Clinton meeting secretly with the U.S. Attorney General on her case? And where are the 33,000 missing emails and all of the other information missing from her case? Why are there so many lies?
When being confronted with support from David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK, Donald Trump was criticized for not disavowing him. In an interview with CNN, he said he didn't know David Duke and knew nothing about him. He asked Jake Tapper to send him a list of people and groups so that he could research them.
Well, I have to look at the group. I mean, I don't know what group you're talking about. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about. I'd have to look. If you would send me a list of the groups, I will do research on them, and certainly I would disavow if I thought there was something wrong. But you may have groups in there that are totally fine, and it would be very unfair. So give me a list of the groups, and I'll let you know.
Okay, I mean, I'm just talking about David Duke and the Ku Klux Klan here, but...
He disavowed David Duke the next day, blaming a bad earpiece for not being able to make everything out. He also stated that anti-Semitism has no place in our country. He did go on to disavow David Duke many more times after this.
I totally disavow the Ku Klux Klan. I totally disavow David Duke. I've been doing it now for 2 weeks. You're probably about the 18th person that's asked me the question.
Would you support a Democrat over David Duke if that was what was necessary to defeat him?
I guess depending on who the Democrat, but the answer would be yes. Look, the answer is as quick as you can say it. In fact, I want to answer you before you even ask the question. Because last time, with another person in your position, I did it very quickly, and they said he didn't do it fast enough. Rebuked. Is that okay? Rebuked.
Rebuked.
Done.
Done.
Okay.
How do you feel about the recent endorsement from David Duke?
I didn't even know he endorsed me. David Duke endorsed me? Okay. All right. I disavow, okay?
As a counterpoint at this time, it is worth pointing out that his daughter, Ivanka Trump, converted to Judaism. His son-in-law is Jewish, and so are his 3 grandchildren. He also liked to point out that he was the Grand Marshal of the 2004 Salute to Israel parade. Though these things would come later during his time as president, 2 significant actions taken in relation to the Jewish people do need to be mentioned. 1. The Trump administration recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moved the U.S. Embassy there from Tel Aviv, something promised by every president since Bill Clinton under the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995, but never done. Many feel that doing this would make it more difficult to negotiate peace between Palestine and Israel, but delaying the move never seemed to help the brokering process. 2. Executive Order 13899, titled Combating Anti-Semitism. This order aims to bolster enforcement of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. In this case, the order is directed more specifically at federally funded educational institutions. The order was made in response to rising anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiments spreading on college campuses and expands interpretation of the law to include religious discrimination as something to add to the list. In an interview from Rolling Stone, Trump made a comment about Republican candidate Carly Fiorina after watching a TV anchor ask her about Trump's momentum. He stated, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president? I mean, she's a woman. And I'm not supposed to say bad things, but really, folks, come on. Are we serious?" Earlier in the article, while following Trump at a campaign event, he also stated, "Carly was a little nasty to me. Be careful. Carly, be careful. But I can't say anything to her because she's a woman." I promised that I wouldn't say that she ran Hewlett-Packard into the ground. I said I wouldn't say it. That her stock value tanked. That she laid off tens of thousands of people and she got viciously fired. I said I will not say that. And that she then went out and ran against Barbara Boxer and lost in a landslide. And I said, I will not say that. Donald Trump would go on to state in follow-up comments that he was talking about her failed leadership as CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Carly Fiorina, for her part, would get to turn the tables on Donald Trump in a televised debate.
Ms. Fiorina, I do want to ask you about this. In an interview last week in Rolling Stone magazine, Donald Trump said the following about you, quote, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president?" Mr. Trump later said he was talking about your persona, not your appearance. Please feel free to respond what you think about his persona.
You know, it's interesting to me, Mr. Trump said that he heard Mr. Bush very clearly and what Mr. Bush said. I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
Moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it.
Whoa.
I did try and fuck her. She was married.
That's huge news there.
No, Nancy.
Yeah.
No, this was marriages, and I moved on her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping. She wanted to get some furniture. I said, "I'll show you where they have some nice furniture." I took her out furniture. I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there, and she was married. Then all of a sudden, I see her. She's now got the big phony tits and everything. She's totally changed her look. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. I can do anything.
While Donald Trump defended this as locker room talk, and his wife stated that wasn't the man she knew, and said in her lifetime she had heard lots of boy talk about herself, it's clear that Donald Trump has been weak in his devotion to his wife. The words, while not defensible, highlight infidelity that has clearly been pursued. It is worth noting that no current allegations or leaks of promiscuity of anything taking place while in office have surfaced. On August 6, 2015, Megyn Kelly began to ask a question about Donald Trump and misogyny at the first Republican presidential debate. She stated, "You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals." Donald Trump was not thrilled with that question and went on the record stating it was inappropriate and that she should apologize. However, he took things a step further, saying, "There was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever." While they eventually buried the hatchet, in a follow-up interview with Kelly, Trump stated that when he is wounded, he tries to unwound himself, and considered his comments a modern-day way of fighting back. You may remember Stormy Daniels, aka Stephanie Clifford. She's the adult film actress that claimed she had a sexual encounter with Donald Trump in 2006 and was trying to egg her on for about a year to get her on The Apprentice. She was paid $130,000 through back-end means via Michael Cohen in October 2016. She gave a full interview to 60 Minutes Australia about the entire event as well. She filed a lawsuit against Trump in March of 2018, alleging that Cohen tried to scare her into not talking. Cohen did admit to paying Daniels out of his own pocket, but did not explain the reason for the payment or whether it was tied to the Trump organization or campaign. Trump, for his part, denied any knowledge of the $130,000 and did not know why Cohen had made the payment or where he got the money from. Rudy Giuliani, attorney to the president, would add fuel to the fire in an interview on Fox News, stating that Donald Trump did pay Clifford over several months, but would not know what the expenses were for. He stated attorneys don't tell clients of every last thing that comes along. As the intrigue continued, Michael Cohen pled guilty to 8 charges to the FBI, 5 counts of tax evasion, 1 of making false statements to a financial institution, 1 of willfully causing an unlawful corporate contribution, and 1 count of making an excessive campaign contribution at the request of a candidate or campaign. In October of 2018, Stephanie Clifford's defamation suit was dismissed, with Clifford ordered to pay Trump's attorney's fees. Her attorney, Michael Avenatti, appealed the case. In December of that year, Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in prison. She would lose her appeal in August 2020, but Trump was ordered to pay her legal fees under applicable California law. If you think the story ended there, it actually hasn't come to a close. In July of 2019, the FBI unsealed a near 900-page document that detailed the investigation into the Stormy Daniels case and the Access Hollywood tape. These were occurring at the same time. I do not have time to go through the document, so I am relying on a report from CNBC. While communication between Cohen, Clifford's lawyer, and certain Trump staff are detailed, none of the communications in which Trump were present could be identified definitively as pertaining to Clifford's claims. One FBI agent wrote, "I believe that at least some of these communications concerned the need to prevent Clifford from going public, particularly in the wake of the Access Hollywood story." In essence, at least according to CNBC, Trump was suspected of talking about the Clifford case, but a firm conclusion was not reached. In August the same year, a Manhattan DA subpoenaed the Trump Organization to investigate the company's role in hush money payments, and a House Judiciary Committee was gearing up, at least as of September 2019, to investigate the alleged hush money payments. Clifford said she would testify if the matter went forward. There is another side to Donald Trump when it comes to women, which may surprise people that interpret him as having a one-track mind. Amongst his presidential accomplishments and boasts, he can claim that the unemployment rate for women is at its lowest point in history. He also established a task force to help combat and investigate a spike in murders and kidnappings of Native American women and girls, started the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, and the U.S. Strategy on Women, Peace, and Security. The Global Development Initiative aims to provide opportunities for women in developing countries to participate in the economy and reinvest in their communities. It claims to have worked with over 12 million women so far, providing vocational education and skills training. Within the Trump Organization itself, The Washington Post reported that women who have worked with him saw him promoting women in a male-dominated industry and giving them the ropes. The woman he put in charge of building Trump Tower, for example, recounted that Donald Trump would often say, "Men are better than women, but a good woman is better than 10 good men." If true, this highlights his boorish nature, but illustrates a sense of respect despite his personal faults. It may come as a surprise, but when it comes to campaign trail comments, I couldn't find much more beyond the previously mentioned KKK disavowing debacle that put Donald Trump in hot water when it comes to controversy that could surround him in regards to the African American community. His pitch to the African American community was basically, Democrats haven't helped you for so long, what do you have to lose by giving the party of Lincoln a try? He did have a significant gaffe at a campaign rally in 2016 by calling a person in attendance, quote, "my African American," unquote. He seemed to do it out of a sense of some sort of novelty admiration, as there weren't many people of color in attendance. The man didn't take it as a slight, but he did leave the GOP and is undecided between the 2020 candidates. There is a notable instance of Trump staring down someone in attendance at a rally in February of that year that wore a KKK shirt, and having him removed by security. But all these things do not add up to a real move, one way or the other, as far as the campaign trail goes. If you go to Donald Trump's past, he was praised profusely by Jesse Jackson in 1998 and 1999 for his contributions to Jackson's Rainbow/Push coalition to help African Americans get into corporate America through building projects and jobs. Years later, as Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, Jackson would reverse his position on the man. Donald Trump has a history of being admired for his wealth in the rap community and pop culture from music to TV. He has been name-dropped in tons of songs for decades, well before he was president. One of his most vocal rap star critics, Eminem, was actually mock-endorsed by Trump as a presidential candidate in 2004 at a National Shady Convention event. As Ice Cube explains his appeal,
Donald Trump is what Americans love. Donald Trump is what Americans aspire to be. Rich, powerful, do what you want to do, say what you want to say, be how you want to be. That's kind of been like the American dream.
Donald Trump has had high-profile, long-lasting connections and friendships with African Americans outside of Kanye West, including people like Don King, Sean P. Diddy Combs, Mike Tyson, Oprah Winfrey, Herschel Walker, Dennis Rodman, Muhammad Ali, and Russell Simmons. Quite notably, Russell Simmons' 30-year relationship with Donald Trump strained and stopped during Trump's presidential run, with Simmons not being able to reconcile how he felt about Donald Trump as a presidential hopeful with how he saw him as a friend. In 2017, the Trump administration passed legislation for tax breaks for investors targeting designated low-income areas. While the intentions to help are present in such a concept, the legislation doesn't collect information on how the money is used, but details an approval process for those that would seek the tax breaks. Depending on how these areas are developed, they could provide opportunity or gentrify areas. The president is looking to expand the policy. Bipartisan support seems like it may be present with modification to the legislation, imbuing it with greater transparency. President Trump can claim some victories for HBCUs, or historically black colleges and universities. One is signing into law bipartisan legislation called the Future Act. Passed in December of 2019, the legislation made over $250 million in funding available per year for STEM programs in minority-serving colleges, with about $85 million going to HBCUs. While Trump hyperbolized this bill as single-handedly saving HBCUs, it did provide them with significant funding. In March of 2018, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos forgave more than $300 million in federal relief funds that went to 4 HBCUs that were taken out in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Additional funding streams have also been made available to HBCUs under the Trump administration. All this being said, the broader Trump administration record with higher education has proposed regular cuts to subsidized student loans and certain types of loan forgiveness, while advocating for changes in flexibility regarding loan repayment. In December of 2018, President Trump signed the First Step Act into law, a bipartisan bill aimed at improving criminal justice outcomes, decreasing the size of the federal prison population, and maintaining public safety. The program seeks ways to reduce recidivism, essentially trying to find methods that help decrease and deter repeated criminal offenses at a federal level. It provides guidance for how prison facilities can enter into recidivism-reducing partnerships with nonprofit and private organizations. It's a larger rehabilitation effort trying to give inmates a path forward besides crime. Inmates can earn up to 54 days of sentence reduction per year of their sentence served towards an earlier release, though certain heinous crimes make inmates ineligible. At least as of September 2019, when the on-screen article was written, 1,600 sentences have been reduced and 3,000 prisoners released under the program, with 91% of beneficiaries being African American. The amount of funding going into the program is quite small relative to the prison population, so it is being applauded by many as an essential step, but something that can be built on. On August 11, 2017, a Unite the Right rally was organized in Charlottesville. The demonstration attracted many white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and Klansmen from 35 states. The statue at the center of the conflict, or perhaps as the excuse for the conflict, was one of Robert E. Lee, the highest-ranking Confederate general in the Civil War. The city council voted to remove the statue and rename Lee Park, named after the statue, to Emancipation Park. A torchlight march took place, with the demonstration turning heated and violent quickly. The next day, the protesters met more opposition, and Antifa showed up to fight. That afternoon is when perhaps the most shocking scene occurred. A car barreled through a crowd of people. Over 30 people were injured, and a woman was killed. The perpetrator was a white nationalist whose father killed his mother, then killed himself. He was sentenced to life in prison. Donald Trump went on record stating there was blame on both sides, and that both sides of the conflict had very fine people. He also went on record stating that neo-Nazis and white nationalists should be condemned totally. While it may not be possible to group every last protester that came as a white nationalist, a sympathizer, or violent extremist, even in a dangerous ideology, it is entirely accurate to say that this particular protest was organized and provoked by white nationalist groups. There is blame to be placed for violence instigated by the far-left response by Antifa, a group whose members hide their identities in public to better avoid law enforcement and being identified, but their response in this case just added more fuel to a fire that was already started and raging. Charlottesville proved to be damaging to the president, ironically because his response was more nuanced, lending credence to the idea that not everybody that was present on either side of the conflict was there with violence or malevolence in mind. Donald Trump has been touting for much of his time in office, outside of the big health crisis the world is dealing with, that the unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics are at their lowest levels in history. This is true. It is hard to say what combination of actions and measures have led to that decline, but historically presidents are given political credit for the state of the economy during their time in office. There are some notable moments with President Trump in regard to gestures and meetings with African Americans as well. In 2019, Donald Trump hosted a Young Black Leadership Summit featuring young black conservatives. On May 6th of 2019, Donald Trump awarded Tiger Woods with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In May of 2020, Trump met with African American leaders in Michigan, talking about the impact of the coronavirus on minority communities, health disparities in those communities, and economic opportunities. And here's a bit of what Donald Trump had to say about African Americans at a White House reception for African American History Month in 2019.
Today we are here to honor the extraordinary contributions of African Americans to every aspect of American life, history, and culture. From the earliest days of this nation, African American leaders, pioneers, and visionaries have uplifted and inspired our country in art, in science, literature, law, film, politics, business, and every arena of national life. The depth and glory of these contributions are beyond measure. You know it, I know it, and everybody knows it. We especially pay tribute to the African American heroes who have sacrificed in the name of freedom, equality, and dignity for all Americans. Thank you. Every citizen alive today and generations yet unborn are forever in debt of the brave souls who stared down injustice and championed the eternal cause of civil rights.
Executive Order 13769, protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, aka the Muslim ban. Part of this order blocks entry into the U.S. for some people for a minimum of 90 days from 7 countries, 5 of which that have a Muslim majority, though 40 other Muslim majority countries were not targeted by the travel ban. The ban is based on 3 criteria. 1. Whether the presence of an alien in the country or area increases the likelihood that the alien is a credible threat to the national security of the United States. 2. Whether a foreign terrorist organization has a significant presence in the country or area. And 3. Whether the country or area is a safe haven for terrorists. The order does not ban those with visas and green cards. The move falls in line with a promise he made on the campaign trail to investigate why so much terrorism is coming from Muslim countries in response to things like the 2015 San Bernardino terrorist attack and the Orlando nightclub shooting. This is an expansion built on a travel ban first put in place by Barack Obama in 2015 called the Visa Waiver Improvement Program and Terrorist Travel Protection Act, which sought to better screen out Islamic State or other terrorist radicals. The executive order sparked protests around the country and accusations of Islamophobia. The executive order ended up going through 3 revisions, eventually ending up at the Supreme Court with language stating the ban applied to foreign nationals who lack a credible claim of a bona fide relationship with a person or entity in the United States. Bona fide relationships include immediate family, spouses, son and daughter-in-laws, and step or half-siblings. Relationships that do not qualify include grandparents, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and grandchildren. The court ruled in its favor with the narrower rules. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion, "The proclamation is expressly premised on legitimate purposes, preventing entry of nationals who cannot be adequately vetted and inducing other nations to improve their practices." He further wrote, "The text says nothing about religion. Plaintiffs and the dissent nonetheless emphasize that 5 of the 7 nations currently included in the proclamation have Muslim-majority populations. Yet that fact alone does not support an inference of religious hostility, given that the policy covers just 8% of the world's Muslim population and is limited to countries that were previously designated by Congress or prior administrations as posing national security risks." There you have it, folks. Part 1. The beginning. 2016. The campaign trail. Relevant background information and presidential actions. It's all done. But we are just getting warmed up. If you thought that was red hot, well, it's time to go full bore. It's all president all the time, and what better way to start the Donald Trump's first term with one single word: Russia. The Mueller Report, published in March 2019, is a report compiled by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, comprised of conclusions regarding Russian election interference in 2016 and allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. As the report is nearly 450 pages, I am relying on an overview of the findings published by PBS NewsHour. The first part of Volume 1 of the report concerns the more general question of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Key findings included that Russia attacked the U.S. election process in 2 ways. One is that Russia used coordinated social media efforts that favored Donald Trump, and 2 is that Russian intelligence engaged in cyber attacks against entities, employees, and volunteers working on the Clinton campaign. Efforts from Russia began as early as 2014, with employees from the Internet Research Agency coming to the U.S. to do research. They began social media campaigns with fake hashtags, bought thousands of online ads, impersonated U.S. citizens, and organized real political rallies. This is an example of a rally that even fooled Donald Trump. Some of these Russian operatives even contacted the Trump campaign in an attempt to receive assistance in coordinating the rallies, but the report was not able to identify any suggestion that the Trump campaign was aware that the requests were from foreign nationals. Hacking activity came from the GRU, a military intelligence arm of the Russian armed forces. The GRU was found to have stolen the passwords and identities of network administrators to obtain campaign materials. The GRU masked itself online under monikers to establish a relation with WikiLeaks asking for anything related to Hillary Clinton. This resulted in the release of the 20,000-plus emails from Hillary Clinton's private server a few days before the Democratic National Convention. This also revealed that there were 33,000 deleted emails on her private server as Secretary of State. Clinton admitted that this was not something she should have done. A week after the DNC, Donald Trump stated, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press." Trump stated this was a joke, but the GRU did target Clinton's personal office within hours of Trump's statement. The Mueller report did not find evidence that the Trump campaign knew the Russians would respond. Russia did target the U.S. election system. They went after private technology companies that develop election software, as well as officials in county and state governments. However, the Mueller report leaves the question open as to whether these efforts affected votes, stating other investigations are ongoing. The second part of Volume 1 details the interactions between Russians, the Trump campaign, and whether any of these interactions developed into coordinated efforts or a conspiracy. The report contains over 100 pages of contacts between Russians and the Trump campaign or presidency to discover whether or not these contacts established a third avenue of Russian interference or influence in the 2016 presidential election. The bottom line conclusion of the report is, based on the available information, the investigation did not establish such coordination. Mueller did write, however, that multiple people with Russian contacts lied to his team to make finding out the details of their contacts more difficult. One contact that Donald Trump specifically had was one he met when the Miss Universe pageant was held in Moscow in 2013. This was Aras Agalarov, a Russian billionaire and Putin ally who owned the building where the pageant was held. A few months later, Donald Trump Jr. signed an agreement with Agalarov's company to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. In 2014, Ivanka Trump visited the country to look into possible locations for the building. In June 2015, Donald Trump announced his presidential bid, and a few months later, a renewed effort to build a Trump Tower in Moscow started. Candidate Trump knew this was happening and was updated about it frequently. However, Trump publicly denies any involvement with Russia. It should be noted here that Donald Trump states in this interview clip that he is all over the world but not in Russia. Another way to interpret this statement is that he has no current work in Russia. If he is referring to not having real estate establishments, this would be a factual statement. That being said, Felix Stater, the architect that would be working on the project, says that he would get Putin's team to buy in on it. Other Trump campaign contacts were established as meeting with Russians as well. One that traveled to Russia to give a speech as a private citizen and not acting as a campaign representative pushed for the Trump campaign to water down language about Russia and Ukraine. Michael Flynn gave speeches in Russia and had meetings with the Russian ambassador to the United States about softening Russian sanctions. Jeff Sessions also met with the Russian ambassador. A campaign chairman shared polling data with a person tied to Russian intelligence, and Trump aide George Papadopoulos met with a man who said that Russians have Clinton dirt. Donald Trump Jr., on June 9, 2016, told his colleagues that he had a lead on negative information about Hillary Clinton from pop singer Eamon Agalarov, R.S. Agalarov's son. The Mueller report states that this information was that two Clinton donors broke Russian laws and laundered money, but that the donors could not be directly tied back to Clinton campaign funds. This information was discussed on a call with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, with Kushner stating the call was a waste of time. The Mueller report concluded that they could not charge the Trump campaign as they were unable to determine whether anyone was aware they were acting illegally and that the information discussed was at a low enough level that it would likely not be prosecutable. In the end, the Mueller report could not establish that there was any coordination or conspiring with Russia. Mueller did state there was information that he was unable to obtain or roadblocks that he ran into, including Trump Jr. never agreeing to an interview, some witnesses lying to investigators, some campaign aides deleting texts, and President Trump's written answers the special counsel felt were not sufficient. If you are looking at the report right now as proof of lies, or lack of evidence, or just a head-scratcher, you'll enjoy Volume 2. This volume details Robert Mueller's findings of alleged obstruction of justice by Donald Trump himself. The first matter relating to this is the firing of FBI Director James Comey. Mueller's investigation suggests that President Trump wanted to know that James Comey was his ally. Comey testified that on January 27, 2017, Trump asked for his loyalty, and that on February 14th, Trump asked Comey to let the Michael Flynn probe go in a private meeting in the Oval Office. On March 20th, 2017, Comey announced an investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Trump asked multiple military and intelligence officials, including Comey, to publicly state that the president is not under investigation. The night Comey was fired, the White House wanted to put a statement out declaring that Acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein came up with the idea to fire Comey. Rosenstein said the story was false. But later that week, President Trump went on NBC News saying he made the decision. The Mueller report's conclusion about the same interview said that Trump knew that firing Comey may prolong the investigation. The Comey portion of the inquiry ended in this statement: "The evidence does not establish that the termination of Comey was designed to cover up a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia." The conclusion identified that the catalyst for the firing was that Comey would not state that the president was not under investigation. This is, however, what led directly to the special counsel being formed. The other most notable matter related to potential attempts at obstruction include President Trump trying to fire Robert Mueller. When Mueller was appointed, Trump reportedly stated to Jeff Sessions, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency." The president also told advisors that Mueller had conflicts of interest, but top staffers disagreed. Trump tried to block Robert Mueller from investigating him or his campaign by trying to get Jeff Sessions to direct the special counsel to probe future elections for election meddling. Jeff Sessions recusing himself was found to be a way for Sessions to not complicate the investigation and protect the president. This could be possibly by not allowing the president to attempt to direct any further actions through him. The Mueller report did indicate that the president wanting Paul Manafort to believe a pardon was possible for his testimony had some evidence. The evidence in the report also suggests that Donald Trump may have known Michael Cohen lied to Congress, but that there is nothing pointing to the president directing Cohen to do so. So, where did this leave the special counsel? In a word, nowhere. The special counsel's finale in regards to allegations against Donald Trump amounted to breadcrumbs.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime.
Some may read this as the question remains open, but if you listen closely to what he said, it summarizes this way. We did not have confidence that the president did not commit a crime. However, we don't have any evidence that the president committed a crime. It admittedly reads like a pandering non sequitur in an attempt to avoid a political reaction. The open question is what led to demand for the investigation in the first place, not a carefully crafted admission of nothing found meant for duck and cover. If you want to watch the PBS special on the Mueller report, I've linked to it in my white paper. As an epilogue to all this, it is worth mentioning that in September of 2020, it was revealed that top Mueller team FBI aides Peter Strzok and Lisa Page wiped 27 phones prior to filing reports for their contents while serving on the special counsel. Robert Mueller's phone was not documented as reviewed either. If you believe Peter Strzok and Lisa Page are on Trump's side, you can find numerous interviews with them stating they do not like him and think he is dangerous. They used personal devices for FBI business, and texts between them were authorized for release by former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. In the texts, written during the midst of the 2016 election, Strzok suggested that he could protect the country from Trump at many levels and stop Donald Trump from being president. After this became public, he was let go from the investigation. Strzok was also fired by the FBI for having an affair with Page and was criticized in his firing for not treating the Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump investigations with equal weight. We've learned that the allegations of Donald Trump colluding with the Russians were not found to have enough basis beyond speculation and intrigue, but that does leave an important question to answer. What is President Trump's record with Russia? You might be surprised to learn that it is somewhat robust in its treatment of Russia as a threat. The following list is a number of examples that you can find more detail on in the Brookings Institution article that is on screen. On August 2, 2017, Trump signed the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. This bill includes sanctions on Russia, Iran, and North Korea, which continues previously existing sanctions and bolsters Ukraine's energy security by working with the Department of State. On September 13, 2017, the administration banned the use of Kaspersky Labs software on government computers as the Russian cybersecurity firm is suspected of working with the Russian government. On December 20, 2017, the Global Magnitsky Act, another executive order, was used to sanction dozens of people and entities from German countries, including Russia, for human rights violations. These include Artem Cheka, son of the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, for seizing assets and contracts away from businesses through government leverage. On December 22, 2017, the U.S. administration approved a plan to provide Ukraine with defensive weaponry to fight Russia-backed separatists. On January 19, 2018, the Department of Defense identified Russia and China as competitors to the U.S. Quote, "The central challenge to U.S. prosperity and security is the reemergence of long-term strategic competition by what the national security strategy classifies as revisionist powers. It is increasingly clear that China and Russia want to shape a world consistent with their authoritarian model, gaining veto authority over other nations' economic, diplomatic, and security decisions." On February 7, 2018, the U.S. killed Russian and Ukrainian forces in Syria backed by Russian mercenaries and military contractors after a U.S. base in an oil refinery was attacked. On February 16, 2018, the Department of Justice indicted 3 Russian entities and 13 Russian individuals for conducting information warfare to influence the 2016 election. On March 14, 2018, the U.S. issued a joint statement with France, Germany, and the UK about the Salisbury attack. The countries suggest Russia is likely responsible for a military-grade nerve agent developed in Russia during the Cold War being used to kill a former Russian military officer and double agent for the UK, as well as his daughter. Another poisoning occurred in June that was thought to have been due to the way the poison was disposed, leading to it falling into unsuspecting hands. On March 15, 2018, more sanctions on 5 further Russian entities and 19 individuals for conducting cyber attacks attempting to interfere with the 2016 U.S. elections were put in place. On March 25th and March 26th of 2018, 48 Russian intelligence officers were expelled from the Russian embassy in Washington and the Russian consulate in Seattle in response to the Salisbury attack in the UK. 12 were expelled from the Russian mission to the United Nations in New York for actions the administration states are outside their official capacity. On July 25, 2018, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announces that the U.S. rejects Russia's annexation of Crimea in the Ukraine, stating, "The United States reaffirms as policy its refusal to recognize the Kremlin's claims of sovereignty over territory seized by force." On August 8, 2018, the U.S. also cuts off any credit to Russia and prohibits the export of security-sensitive goods and technologies. The list of goods expands on a list enacted in the Obama administration. On November 26, 2018, the Secretary of State condemns Russia's use of military force to seize 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels. Ukrainian vessels traveling through the Kerch Strait were attacked in violation of international law. On December 5, 2019, Russia-based cybercriminal organization, literally called Evil Corps, is sanctioned for using malware to steal more than $100 million from banks and financial institutions. The hack saw banks and financial institutions affected in over 40 countries. In December of 2019, the House of Representatives approved 2 articles of impeachment against Donald Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. To detail the background that led to this, on August 12, 2019, an anonymous CIA officer filed a whistleblower complaint to the Inspector General of the intelligence community. Finding the matter to be of concern, the Inspector General forwarded the complaint to Joseph McGuire, the acting director of National Intelligence. Joseph McGuire did not forward the complaint to congressional intelligence committees. He was advised by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel that the reported activities did not constitute an intelligence activity within the responsibility and authority of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. According to anonymous sources as reported by the New York Times, it was alleged that President Trump was informed of the whistleblower's complaint before he unfroze $391 million in military aid to Ukraine. The Trump administration had previously expressed concerns of widespread corruption in Ukraine. Of note is the whistleblower's claims that Trump sought to solicit election interference from Ukraine. The person states that they were not witness to the majority of the events described, but that his account was filtered through colleagues. The complaint reported that a July 25th phone call led to Trump asking Ukraine to initiate or continue investigation into Joseph Biden and his son Hunter Biden. The president also allegedly asked for the country to look into Russian claims of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, with a specific request that the Ukrainian leader locate and turn over servers used by the DNC and be turned over to a U.S. cybersecurity firm called CrowdStrike. Trump also purportedly asked the Ukrainian government to speak to Rudolph Giuliani and Attorney General Barr as his personal contacts on the requested matters. The complaint also states that multiple senior White House officials had intervened to lock down record of the phone call, quote, as is customary by the White House Situation Room. However, the complaint also alleges that the transcript was directed to be put into a separate electronic system that is meant to store information of a very sensitive nature. The complaint goes on to describe what the anonymous agent has heard surrounding how the Ukrainian government may be able to meet these demands, though little of it is sourced or cited outside of news reports. In my reading of the official declassified readout of that July 25th phone call, I found the following. During the 30-minute call, the president congratulates President Zelensky of Ukraine on victories in Ukraine's parliamentary election. Zelensky stated that they had an opportunity to learn from Donald Trump and that it helped them. Trump goes on to talk about the U.S. doing more for Ukraine than other countries that are talking Ukraine but not doing anything. Zelensky agrees and says that there is an issue with sanctions not being enforced and that the EU should be Ukraine's biggest partner, but that it is actually the U.S. At this point is where the call has the alleged requests or directives take place. Trump says to Zelensky, I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people. The server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance, but they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Zelensky goes on to agree, stating that, we are ready to open a new page on cooperation in relations between the United States and Ukraine. That he is assigning a new ambassador to the United States, that he plans to surround himself with great people, and that the investigation will be done openly and candidly. Trump also relays concerns that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, was making headlines for his father bragging that he shut down a prosecutor in Ukraine. Zelensky says he is aware of the situation and that he wants honesty restored in their process. Zelensky's last diplomatic topics of the call revolve around possibly visiting the U.S. and Trump possibly visiting Ukraine, as well as working towards energy independence for Ukraine. As the call doesn't describe in great detail what Donald Trump may have been referring to, I dug a bit deeper. CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity firm that investigated hacking of the DNC network in 2015 and 2016 and found that Russian military intelligence was behind the attacks. There is a theory that the DNC fabricated evidence to implicate Russia in the cyber attacks. The theory states that one of the co-founders of CrowdStrike is a Ukrainian who the DNC directed to discredit Russia for the election interference and had a grudge with Vladimir Putin. This theory was discredited. CrowdStrike is a publicly traded company in California with all its servers located in the United States. Whether Trump was acting on ego, genuine concern, or both, the request appears to relate to a national security concern as pertaining to U.S. election interference. Trump's concern over Hunter and Joe Biden revolves around Hunter Biden's appointment to the board of directors of Burisma Holdings, a private company that has drilled for natural gas in Ukraine since 2002. He was appointed to the board in 2014 during a time when Joe Biden was trying to pressure the country to get rid of corruption and reform the energy industry. Hunter Biden was making as much as $50,000 a month and was on the board until his term expired in April 2019. While there is no evidence that Joe Biden shut down a prosecutor looking into corruption involving his son and Burisma, Biden did help oust a prosecutor named Viktor Shokin that the U.S. identified as protecting corruption and the vested interest of the Ukrainian system as it stood at the time. This was in 2015. Shokin had an open case on Burisma Holdings that he was not actively pursuing at the time. The prosecutor's deputy was quoted in Bloomberg as saying, "There was no pressure from anyone from the U.S. to close cases against Zlochevsky, owner of Burisma Holdings. It was shelved by Ukrainian prosecutors in 2014 through 2015. The timing is curious, since Hunter Biden joined the company in April of 2014, 2 months after the UK requested information against Zlochevsky in relation to money laundering allegations. New uncovered emails, reported on by the New York Post in mid-October, have revealed that Hunter Biden did arrange meetings between high-level Burisma executives and Joe Biden, despite Joe Biden claiming in the past that he never had any relationship to his son's work or talked with his son about the work he did. As this was in the midst of his diplomatic efforts in Ukraine that pushed out a prosecutor with a case that may have moved forward with Burisma, this reflects well on Trump's instinct on the matter. Unfortunately, the story was blocked on social media, and the New York Post took it down. The CEOs of Facebook and Twitter will now be testifying before a Senate hearing as the material was removed or heavily throttled by the social media giants for reasons that do not line up with reports about how the information was obtained. With this whole situation in mind, the question that remains is whether or not in Trump's case that this is a request for election interference. On the face of Trump's personal reasoning for asking, it could be, though the scrutiny surrounding Hunter Biden and Joe Biden on this matter has been present since 2014. As a final aside, opposition like to point to the Steele dossier from 2016, in which Hillary Clinton's campaign solicited Fusion GPS to do research on Donald Trump and hired a British spy named Christopher Steele to find anything he could on Trump's ties to Russia. Foreign assistance in election efforts, implied or real, is always a bad look. We now have the origins for the basis of the articles of impeachment, but what happened next? Once the articles of impeachment were approved in the House of Representatives, they moved on to trial in the Senate. This makes Trump the third president to ever be impeached by the House. On the charge of abuse of power, Article 1 alleges that President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 United States presidential election. The detailed allegation stated that he sought to solicit the government of Ukraine to openly announce inquiries that would benefit his re-election efforts and harm political opponent Joe Biden. The article claims that Trump sought this interference working under a false theory that Russia promoted that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election as opposed to Russia. This section also says that he pursued this through two primary actions. One was the release of $391 million of U.S. taxpayer funds that were placed on hold by Trump, meant for military and security assistance to Ukraine to oppose Russian aggression. The other action was a head-of-state meeting at the White House with the president of Ukraine that was meant to demonstrate U.S. support for the government of Ukraine in its efforts to defend against said Russian aggression. Article 2 is where the obstruction of Congress charge is made. As part of the impeachment inquiry process, the House issued subpoenas to a number of White House officials. Only one of them complied, a U.S. ambassador to the EU, but he was not authorized to release any documents. The White House said it would not cooperate and that the inquiry was illegitimate and unconstitutional. The obstruction of Congress charge is exactly related to this, that the White House defied abiding by the subpoena and withheld producing documents sought by committees. The White House also directed other executive branch agencies, offices, and officials to not comply with the subpoenas. It should be noted, I could not find any article or authoritative source that states it is required to comply with subpoenas from the House of Representatives. They do not always require compliance in other forms. The best I could find is that refusal to comply with a subpoena can be interpreted as contempt of Congress, which is not a crime, but an impediment of government activity that can strengthen a sentence should a conviction be made. In the Senate vote, the vote on the articles of impeachment did not meet the supermajority of 67 votes needed on either charge, and the president was acquitted.
47 years, Americans of all backgrounds have traveled from across the country to stand for life. And today, as President of the United States, I am truly proud to stand with you.
Here is Donald Trump on Meet the Press on his views about abortion in 1999.
Partial birth abortion, the eliminating of abortion in the third trimester, big issue in Washington. Would President Trump ban partial birth abortion?
Well, look, I'm very pro-choice. I hate the concept of abortion. I hate it. I hate everything it stands for. I cringe when I listen to people debating the subject. But I just believe in choice. And again, it may be a little bit of a New York background because there is some different attitude in different parts of the country. And, you know, I was raised in New York and grew up and work and everything else in New York City. But I am strongly for choice, and yet I hate the concept of abortion.
But you would not ban it?
No.
Or ban partial birth abortion?
No, I am pro-choice in every respect and as far as it goes, but I just hate it.
How did he go from this to this interesting preview at CPAC in 2011?
I'm pro-life. I'm against gun control, and I will fight to end Obamacare and replace it. Replace it with something that makes sense for people in business and not bankrupt the country. If I decide to run, I will not be raising taxes. We'll be taking in hundreds of billions of dollars from other countries that are screwing us. We'll be creating vast numbers of productive jobs, and we'll rebuild our country so that we can be proud. Our country will be great again. Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Donald Trump's position seemed to further evolve, or at least was tested, during this CNN interview in 2016.
At a town hall with MSNBC's Chris Matthews, the frontrunner stating that women who get abortions should face, quote, some form of punishment if the procedure were to be outlawed.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years,
I don't know. That I don't know.
That particular interview caused quite a stir, as many pro-life advocates don't share the position that Trump described. To be fair, the question was posed under the hypothetical that the procedure is already illegal. But this was a shocker for a lot of folks. He walked back his comments twice after this interview. Perhaps this other CNN interview from 2015 sheds the most light on Trump's position.
I bought your 2000 book, The America We Deserve. So in reading it, there were a couple of things that jumped out at me. One is on abortion. At the time, you said that you were pro-choice. Now you've changed, right?
Not strongly, but I am pro-life. I had an experience with a friend of mine who was, frankly, they were going to abort their child, which they ended up having, and their child is like this magnificent person. And it had an impact. I've seen that now a couple of times with other people, but I'm pro-life.
You're pro-life, but you do think that there should be exceptions for rape and incest.
Yes, and life, you know, the health of the mother, the death, because, you know, you have some cases where the mother may die. It's basically Ronald Reagan had the same thing. He had the 3 exceptions.
It's been speculated by at least one former Trump aide that Trump may have changed his views after having his youngest son, Barron. The two allegedly had a hypothetical conversation that sounded like it described Trump's situation. In the conversation, the hypothetical child that was born had, quote, difficulties. With a potential explanation for his changes in stance, what have Donald Trump's actions been? Note, this is not a comprehensive list. It is meant to give an overall view of the policies and actions he has taken. In 2017, Trump reinstated the Mexico City policy. The policy bars U.S. federal funding to non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, in foreign countries that provide abortion counseling or referrals, advocate to decriminalize abortion, or expand abortion services. This is a foreign policy that has been implemented under Republican presidents since Ronald Reagan and repealed by every Democrat president in between. The policy was expanded under Trump, though I am not sure why the U.S. is funding family planning in foreign countries in the first place. Modification to Title X. This isn't a working title for a new Mega Man game. The Title X family planning program was enacted in 1970 by Richard Nixon under the Public Health Service Act. It is the only federal grant program dedicated to providing low-income people with family planning services. In 2019, a new section was added titled Prohibition of Abortion. It reads, none of the funds appropriated under this title shall be used in programs where abortion is a method of family planning. What this means is that in order to receive Title X funds, agencies cannot refer for abortion. Agencies can still provide information on abortion as part of non-directive counseling that leaves decision-making open to people being counseled. This affected organizations like Planned Parenthood that not only refer for abortions but perform abortions on site and have opted to forego participating in the Title X program. It should be noted that the bill is written with family planning in mind, so proponents of the additional language of the legislation argue that this more accurately represents Title X's intention. I read over Title X myself and found no mention or allusion to abortion as a family planning service in even the broad sense that Title X prescribes in its opening paragraph. To quote, the Secretary is authorized to make grants to and enter into contracts with public or non-profit private entities to assist in the establishment and operation of voluntary family planning projects which will offer a broad range of acceptable and effective family planning methods and services, including natural family planning methods, infertility services, and services for adolescents. To the extent practicable, entities which receive grants or contracts under this subsection shall encourage family participation in projects assisted under this subsection. Fetal tissue and the National Institute of Health. The Trump administration has restricted the use of fetal tissue from elective abortions in research projects at the NIH. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, this ban came as part of an audit that was started after a contract between the HHS, Advanced Bioscience Resources Incorporated, and the FDA that was providing fetal tissue for the development of testing protocols was terminated. The department stated it was not sufficiently assured that the contract included appropriate protections applicable to fetal tissue research or met all other procurement requirements. A 2019 grant from the NIH shows that research into alternatives to the use of fetal tissues is of interest, but there is concern that viable alternatives may not be found, or at least not of the same biological value.
I want to get peace. The main thing, we want to get peace.
In 2017, North Korea conducted a number of missile and nuclear tests which demonstrated the ability to reach Japan. In January of that year, they said they were nearly ready to test-fire intercontinental ballistic missiles. They fired ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan on April 5th. The U.S. Navy inaccurately announced on April 9th that it was sending a Navy strike group towards the Korean peninsula, when in reality, on April 18th, the supercarrier USS Carl Vinson was 3,500 miles away in a military exercise in the Indian Ocean. On April 24th, the Carl Vinson participated in tactical training drills near the Philippines, and North Korea threatened to sink the ship. Late in the same month, Donald Trump said there was a chance that the U.S. could have a major conflict with North Korea. On July 4th, North Korea launched another ballistic missile into the Sea of Japan and said it was demonstrating that the country is a full-fledged nuclear power that can attack any part of the world. In August, tensions increased between the U.S. and North Korea. President Trump warned that nuclear threats would be met with fire and fury after reports emerged that the country had produced warheads that could be installed inside missiles. North Korea responded, stating it was thinking of attacking U.S. military bases in Guam. Donald Trump wrote on Twitter on August 11th, "Military solutions are now fully in place, locked and loaded. Should North Korea act unwisely, hopefully Kim Jong-un will find another path." On August 29th, North Korea launched a missile that flew over Japan and traveled 1,700 miles before hitting the Pacific. Donald Trump stated that all options are on the table regarding North Korea. In September, a 6.3 magnitude earthquake was recorded in North Korea. It was concluded that they had conducted another nuclear weapon test. North Korea launched a missile over Japan on September 15th that traveled further than any recorded missile that they had launched in history, reaching a distance of 2,300 miles. As tensions kept rising, the president addressed the United Nations and called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man, and said that he had put himself on a suicide mission for himself and his regime if he does not stop. Donald Trump enacted sanctions on financial institutions conducting business with the country in an executive order on September 20th. Another apparent record distance missile test was conducted in November, with North Korea claiming the missile reached an altitude of 2,800 miles, which is more than 10 times the height of the International Space Station. There seemed to be no end in sight, and unease rose into the first quarter of 2018. Donald Trump even spoke at length about North Korea at the 2018 State of the Union. However, on March 8th, Trump announced that he would meet with Kim Jong-un. Though the event almost did not happen, they did meet on June 12th in Singapore. Sanctions remained in place, but they both signed a joint declaration that included such agreements as the two countries would seek peace and prosperity as desired by their people, that they would seek to build a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean peninsula, and that North Korea would work towards the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un again in 2019 in Vietnam, and later that year with both Kim and Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, inside the demilitarized zone, briefly crossing into North Korea. Trump is both the first sitting president to have meetings with any leader of North Korea and the first sitting president to enter North Korea. Unfortunately, North Korea's nuclear program efforts have not stopped or slowed. On June 12, 2020, the 2-year anniversary of the summit in Singapore, North Korea released a press statement stating that the Trump administration was seeking political gain without returns for North Korea and demolished a joint office building it shared with South Korea for diplomatic relations with the United States. It is unclear what legacy this strategy will have, but it is the first time that a U.S. president has tried a differing approach. It also does appear that Kim Jong-un has a certain level of respect for Donald Trump, even wishing him well through state media after he contracted the coronavirus.
This is an executive order minimizing the economic burden of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act pending repeal.
A lot has been said of Donald Trump's propensity for executive orders. But the fact of the matter is that at the time this list was being compiled in late September of 2020, his rate of executive orders by year is less than 14 presidents and within 20 executive orders by year of 22 presidents. Whatever your position is on the use or frequency of executive orders, this places him slightly above the middle of the pack. At the time of recording, he has issued 181 executive orders, though amidst current events, I imagine they may be getting used more frequently. This will not be a full run-through of all executive orders, but a highlight reel of notable as well as controversial ones. Executive Order 13765, minimizing the economic burden of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act pending repeal. This aimed to start peeling back pieces of the Affordable Care Act. Directions included to grant exemptions or delay implementations of requirements that would place financial burdens on people and seek an open market across state lines in the healthcare market. This order resulted in the IRS not requiring tax filers to state whether or not they had health insurance and avoid penalties. Executive Order 13925, preventing online censorship. This order contends that media companies that edit content apart from restricted posts that are violent, obscene, or harassing are engaged in editorial conduct. The order seeks to, quote, foster clear ground rules promoting free and open debate on the internet. The order was made after Donald Trump made a couple tweets stating that mail-in voting would lead to massive voter fraud. According to analysis by NPR, this year's Democratic presidential primaries had more than 500,000 absentee ballots rejected. This is more than the 2016 general election. Executive Order 13798, promoting free speech and religious liberty. The order directs the executive branch to protect religious organizations' right to engage in religious and political speech. The order targets an IRS rule that can remove a nonprofit's tax-exempt status if it gets involved in endorsing candidates. A full repeal requires the support of Congress. The order also seeks to provide relief to groups with objections to the Affordable Care Act's provision of mandating coverage of contraceptives as part of health plans. Executive Order 13808, imposing sanctions with respect to the situation in Venezuela. The order places sanctions on Venezuela that prevented the Venezuelan government to sell government bonds on the American market while still allowing import of crude oil. The sanctions were put in place in response to recent actions and policies of the government of Venezuela, including serious abuses of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Barack Obama's administration also targeted individuals involved in human rights abuses via an executive order in 2015. Executive Order 13813, promoting healthcare choice and competition across the United States. This order further targets the Affordable Care Act. It allows employers to offer HRAs, offer reimbursement to employees that purchase other health insurance plans, and ends subsidies to health insurance companies selling to low-income consumers through state health insurance marketplaces. Executive Order 13821, streamlining and expediting requests to locate broadband facilities in rural America. This order declares that it is the policy of the executive branch to accelerate the deployment and adoption of high-speed broadband in rural America. Executive Order 13841, affording Congress an opportunity to address family separation. This order addresses what has been viewed as a severe oversight in regards to the Trump administration's family separation policy at the U.S.-Mexico border. The policy was in place for a few months in 2018, with Trump signing a new order reuniting families after it was discovered the current policy did not include specific measures for how that would occur. Federal authorities would separate children from parents or guardians illegally entering the U.S. The adults were prosecuted and held in federal jail, while the children were placed under the supervision of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Versions of a zero-tolerance policy of this nature started with George W. Bush. Exceptions were often made with adults traveling with minors. Under the Obama administration, a surge of women immigrating with children illegally resulted in the Department of Homeland Security building family detention centers while people waited to hear their asylum cases. This would not prove to last, as a court ruling in 2016 led to women and children being released after being detained for 21 days. This practice would become known as catch and release. Executive Order 13871, imposing sanctions with respect to the iron, steel, aluminum, and copper sectors of Iran. In response to Iran announcing it would partially withdraw from its obligations under the JCPOA, aka the Iran deal, the order puts sanctions into effect that restrict the direct or indirect sales of raw or semi-finished metals such as iron, steel, aluminum, and copper. The United States pulled out of the deal on the same day 1 year earlier, with Donald Trump stating that all the deal did was aid Iran in moving closer to a nuclear weapon. In an interview, former Secretary of State John Kerry had stated that some of the funds in the deal would likely go to fund terrorism. There have been several executive orders in response to COVID-19 as well. These have included allocation of health and medical resources, allocating assistance to the food supply chain, particularly in regards to meat and poultry, extending unemployment benefits, deferring FICA payroll taxes through the end of the year, extending student loan deferral through the end of the year, and extending a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for federally backed mortgages. Everyone, you've made it a long, long way, and I thank you for sticking through this journey with me. There's a little left to go in this deep dive before we reach what I've saved for last, COVID-19. It is the current topic that no one can escape, so I wanted to refresh your memory on other things before the big finale. The next handful of topics I'm calling Trump Minis. They aren't less important per se, they can just be covered in a few minutes or less with the information I've gathered. There will be no special transitions here, just a little piano. So let's get on it and ride the road to the end. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. As part of their commitment in joining, they were to lower their trade barriers and follow international trade practices established by the participating nations. Part of this included agreeing to not subject foreign goods to heavy regulations or taxes. Then-President Bill Clinton described it as the most significant opportunity that we have had to create positive change in China since the 1970s. He also described the move as a one-way street, as it required China to open its markets, and the U.S. could now sell and distribute products in China made in America without having to manufacture in China. What ended up happening is that China flooded the U.S. with exports, causing the U.S. to have a significant trade deficit. Jobs did not come to the U.S. either. In fact, jobs were lost as manufacturing stayed in and increased in China. The Communist Party also has strict control over the country and its finances, leaving those who want to trade and do business with China beholden to the government's terms. With the U.S. subsidizing China's economy to a significant degree and owing the country over $1 trillion in debt, amongst other factors like its investment in technology and AI, China as a dominant superpower in the world is a real possibility, though that is a nuanced scenario to predict. In 2018, Trump enacted tariffs on a number of goods including steel, aluminum, solar panels, and washing machines. In March of that year, he sought to apply tariffs on $100 billion worth of Chinese goods, citing that China's illicit trade practices, ignored for years by Washington, have destroyed thousands of American factories and millions of American jobs. China, in response to U.S. actions, imposed tariffs of its own in April. The back and forth continued with more tariffs. However, in early 2019, the trade deficit had reached its highest number since 2008, to the tune of $621 billion. In June of 2019, the tariffs seemed to start taking an effect as China showed its slowest second quarter GDP growth in 27 years. The third quarter growth would be at its slowest in almost 30. The value of the renminbi, the currency of China, also fell that summer to the lowest point since 2008. On the U.S. side, the back-and-forth tariffs also affected industry here. Lumber and wood exports to China fell by 40%. The manufacturing sector was brought to its lowest output, order, and employment levels since 2009, though slight growth was still being seen in the industry as a whole, with construction contracts, private home building, and automobile manufacturing. In January of 2020, President Trump and China's vice premier signed the U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal to begin reestablishing relations. During this time, China's economic growth fell to a 30-year low, and the U.S.'s trade deficit fell for the first time in 6 years. Perhaps ironically, COVID-19 has spurred more trading and some tariff exceptions with both the U.S. and China for medical supplies and food. This has currently put China back in position as the United States' top trading partner. Donald Trump has not released his tax returns despite indicating that he would multiple times, a move that has been highly criticized. It should be noted that this is not a requirement of presidential candidates, but it is a long-standing tradition that started in 1973 when Richard Nixon was discovered to have only paid about $800 in taxes in 1970 and 1971, even though he was earning approximately $200,000 per year. He released 3 years of tax returns in response to backlash. Jimmy Carter expanded the practice by releasing not only summaries of tax returns, as Gerald Ford did before him, but releasing his returns in their entirety. Donald Trump's tax returns were uncovered by the New York Times and published in September of 2020. The returns date back to 1995. A great breakdown of them and allegations that the New York Times is making can be found on the YouTube channel Meet Kevin, which is linked to in my white paper. While they are interesting, I'm no tax authority and do not know how to analyze tax returns, revenue streams, what is legal and what is not, or how to manage gigantic amounts of wealth, gains, and losses. While preparing for this video, I did come across a misleading element of the New York Times story as pointed out by political commentator Tim Pool. The New York Times misrepresented the amount Donald Trump had paid in taxes at the beginning of their article. I will let Tim Pool explain.
Take a look at these first two sentences. Donald J. Trump paid $750 in federal income tax the year he won the presidency. In his first year in the White House, he paid another $750. You know what's really funny about that? They debunk themselves in their own story. This is not true. He did not. So let's be fair. You guys ever watch Rick and Morty?
Yeah.
Really. Have you seen the one? So there's an episode where they're on the spaceship in the simulation, and the teacher asks Morty, "What's like?" I think he said, "What's 9 times 8?" And Morty goes, "It's at least 40." And he goes, "That's correct. It is at least 40." Like, it's true. So when they say Donald Trump paid $750 in federal income taxes, you know what that means? He did.
At least $750.
Yeah, at least $750. So it's like if something cost you $100 and you spent $10, I could say you spent $10.
Yeah.
You spent more than $10, but you did give him $10, right? The New York Times actually says in their own story, I gotta scroll down to try and figure out where it is, that Trump paid way more than that and let the government just keep it. Yet they open their story by saying he only paid $750. Check this out. Each time he requested an extension to file his 1040, and each time he made the required payments to the IRS. For income taxes he might owe $1 million for 2016 and $4.2 for 2017. But virtually all of that liability was washed away when he eventually filed, and most of the payments were rolled forward to cover potential taxes in future years. You know what that means? It means he gave the government $5.2 million, even though he lost a ton of money and only owed $1,500. Right. So when they say he paid $750, that's just 100%
what they should have said is he
factually
owed
untrue.
$750.
This mini-section will briefly touch on Donald Trump's actions in regards to the LGBT community. It specifically addresses the most notable things I could find that are clearly positive as well as more controversial. Trump has personally donated to charities focused on the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. In an interview from 2000 with Advocate, a gay magazine, he stated he was for amending the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include a ban of discrimination based on sexual orientation. The Trump administration has initiated a program called Ending the HIV Epidemic, a Plan for America. The program covers the cost of prophylaxis, a medication prescribed to reduce the risk of HIV infection for up to 200,000 people per year through the end of 2025. In June of 2019, President Trump made a statement that his administration has launched a global campaign to decriminalize homosexuality throughout the world. The campaign is headed by former acting director of national intelligence Richard Grenell, an openly gay member of the administration and the first gay cabinet member in the history of the United States. On July 26, 2017, Trump stated via Twitter, "After consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgenders in the military would entail. Thank you." The announcement of the reinstatement of the ban led to protests in major cities like New York and San Francisco and was opposed by many military personnel. Of particular note is that the U.S. military's ban on transgender troops was ended just the year before, under the Obama administration. When the new ban went into effect, it did not allow the military to support or pay for gender reassignment surgery and required transgendered people to serve in their biological sex. If any transgendered people were diagnosed with gender dysphoria, a doctor had to certify that they were stable in their biological sex for at least 36 months before service. In an interview with Piers Morgan, Trump said that the military has strict standards on taking drugs and that gender reassignment was not only an expense, but that it put servicemen on drugs and took them away from service for extended periods of time. In October of 2018, the Trump administration changed the policy for visa requirements for same-sex partners of foreign diplomats as well as the staff of U.S.-based international organizations. The adjustment requires that same-sex partners must be married to be eligible for a visa. The State Department provided rationale that this was done so that the policy would recognize that same-sex marriage was legal nationwide and codify treatment of the visa requirements as equal. Criticism of the action from LGBTQ activists included that the move will hurt couples who come from countries where same-sex marriage is not legal, and that even if these couples marry in the U.S., that may put foreign diplomats in danger back home. A recent article by The Atlantic reported that Donald Trump wouldn't visit the Aisne-Marne American Cemetery near Paris in 2018 because he was concerned about his hair getting screwed up in the rain. The article suggests that the president said the cemetery was filled with losers and suckers. It should be mentioned that all sources in this article were kept anonymous and that multiple eyewitnesses who were present have gone on record as saying that the decision to not go was not made by Trump himself and that the comments attributed to him were not made. These people include John Bolton, who previously wrote about the incident in a book he authored, Zach Fuentes, former Deputy White House Chief of Staff, and Jamie McCourt, the U.S. Ambassador to France. At the end of the day, the most negative interpretation of events that can be made is a he said, she said scenario that makes the story moot. Comments that Donald Trump can be rightly criticized for are stating that John McCain is not a war hero because he was captured. He immediately half-corrected himself after saying this and stated that maybe McCain is a war hero. Trump was frustrated with McCain over him calling all the people that showed up to a Trump rally in McCain's home state of Arizona crazies, though that is not an excuse for insulting someone's war record. In 2018, Donald Trump put forth the Mission Act. This law fulfilled a campaign promise that no veteran will die waiting for service. Under the previous administration, veterans could access other forms of care outside the VA, but only if the VA gave the green light to do so. This led to controversies involving wait times for care, which led to preventable deaths of many veterans. Congress came up with a temporary measure called the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act in 2014 that provided choice temporarily. The Mission Act made this permanent. The CARES Act. This bill designates $300 million in emergency aid for homeless and low-income veterans. The funds go towards housing as well as emergency housing paired with healthcare services to help combat the spread of COVID-19. There are a couple of other bills worth looking at as well. The Veteran Treatment Court Coordination Act bill puts funding towards the development of more veterans' treatment courts. Treatment courts take in vets with substance abuse or mental health issues who commit nonviolent crimes and provide court-supervised medical treatment instead of going to jail. The other bill is the Ryan Cools and Paul Benn Specially Adaptive Housing Act of 2019. This is a revision to an already existing bill that expands funding to severely injured veterans to renovate their homes and accommodate disabilities. While immigration has already been discussed to some degree, there is one major hallmark of Donald Trump's platform that I know needs no introduction, and that is the wall. A good place to start is one of Trump's executive orders. The wall was a notable campaign promise, and he sought to make good on it. Executive Order 13767, Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Improvements. The action calls for a wall to be built along the Mexico-U.S. border. Donald Trump sought $5.6 billion in funds to begin work. Almost 2 years later, in December of 2018, the federal government went into shutdown over deadlock regarding the wall. Just prior to the shutdown, Democrats gained a majority in the House of Representatives during the November 2018 elections. Donald Trump agreed to a stopgap bill to reopen the government temporarily so that negotiation about the wall could be finalized. Trump met with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. While the president stuck to his demand funding for the border wall, the proposal was made by Democratic leaders for $1.3 billion to go to a border fence instead. This was not accepted. Within a few weeks, Donald Trump proposed a temporary extension of the DACA or Dreamers program in exchange for border wall funding. This included no path to citizenship. The proposal would limit the ability of minors from multiple countries to apply for asylum, and the measure was rejected. Donald Trump has since moved his stance on DACA to allow people in the U.S. under that program to have a path to citizenship in exchange for border wall and border security funding. Talks are pending. As of September 29, 2020, there have been 341 miles of border wall completed, 240 new miles are under construction, and 157 new miles are in pre-construction. Currently, about 10 miles of wall are being completed per week. The Paris Climate Accord was penned at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and signed by 196 parties, including the U.S., in April of 2016. The parties agreed to a global response to decrease the world's temperature below pre-industrial levels. Some of the most notable terms in the agreement are that all parties are to prepare, communicate, and maintain certain national levels and to communicate those numbers every 5 years for transparency in those ambitions. It also requires participating parties to provide the public access to climate change education, training, and public awareness. President Trump pulled out of the agreement in June 2017 for one particularly notable downside. The agreement requires developed countries to support the efforts of developing countries to invest in the initiatives and material means necessary to achieve those objectives. With almost 200 countries signed on to the initiative, most of which would not have the financial or labor resources to reach the goals of the agreement, this would equate to a massive expense that would fall on the U.S. in a very significant way. The agreement affirmed developed countries' duty to mobilize $100 billion a year in climate finance by 2020 and continue to do so every year until 2025. Trump called the financial and economic burdens of the deal draconian. To date, none of the involved countries have mobilized funds that have gotten anywhere close to the commitment in the agreement, and no targets have been met. The Trump administration backed out of the Iran nuclear deal, called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Trump felt the deal didn't go far enough and walked away from it in May 2018. The main criticism that served as the rationale for walking away was that it was one-sided and that Iran was defaulting on its terms. The deal lifted some sanctions on Iran for it abandoning some parts of its nuclear program. The deal brought money and trade to Iran, but the deal is temporary, only lasting a certain number of years, and does not restrict Iran's ballistic missile program. Iran also involved itself militarily in the wars in Syria and Yemen. In June 2020, President Trump called on Iran to come back to the negotiating table in time for the November election. U.S. sanctions have hurt the Iranian economy, but the government there is waiting to see who wins the presidential race.
Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
Donald Trump's response to the novel coronavirus has been heatedly discussed. There is both strong support and disgust amongst the public. My general feeling has been that it is hard to harshly criticize anyone in a position of power, as no one has figured out a clear way forward and everyone is feeling the way out. However, it is worth taking a look at any inaction and action that has made the highlight reel. As this situation is still developing, it's possible that this timeline of events may be missing some recent developments. January 14th, 2020. The World Health Organization stated on Twitter that preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus, and they reported to NPR that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission, period. On January 23rd, the WHO stated it is too early to declare the coronavirus outbreak an international public health emergency. On January 30th, Donald Trump stated at a campaign rally that the U.S. is working with China and that there are only 5 cases of the virus in the United States. This appears to be accurate, as the counter at worldmeters.info, linked in the resources below, shows that there were only 15 known cases as of February 15, 2020, the first day the site started tracking. January 31st, an executive order is issued banning entry into the United States for anyone who has been in China in the past 14 days, with the exceptions of U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and close family. 10,000 cases had been reported by China at that time, and the World Health Organization stated travel bans are not necessary in response. On February 13th, Donald Trump stated in an interview that we have only 12 cases documented in the United States. On March 10th, Donald Trump urges calm. The president is asked about a figure being floated that up to 100 million people could be infected. The president responds stating that he has been given many projections, and that in the U.S. there are currently 26 deaths, with 8,000 deaths from the standard flu. On March 14th, the president banned travel from 26 European nations for 30 days. Joe Biden called the action xenophobic and suggested it was not based on science. On March 21st, President Trump tweeted that hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin taken together have a chance to be a huge development in the race to combat the virus, and credits a study in the International Journal of Antimicrobial Agents. He finishes the tweets by stating that he hopes both will be put to use immediately. The position is not widely popular, and Donald Trump ended up using the drug as a preliminary measure. The president did promote a video that went viral of doctors claiming it had the potential to cure the virus. An archived link can be found here. The video was removed by Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. The same group, called America's Frontline Doctors, held a follow-up press conference on Capitol Hill to address censorship of their conference and promote the possible use of the drug. On March 28th, the FDA issued a statement approving emergency use of hydroxychloroquine for use with hospitalized patients combating COVID-19. As studies continued, the FDA removed the emergency use of hydroxychloroquine in June. Studies and debate continue on the efficacy of the drug, with some studies suggesting that the drug is effective in treatment. Trump's announcement did cause prescriptions for the drug to increase immensely, and a high-profile case of an Arizona man dying after taking a variant of the chemical used in parasite treatment for fish went viral. His wife also reportedly took the substance and survived. It was later discovered that the woman has donated thousands of dollars to Democrat campaigns, and as of April, she was being investigated as a suspect as her husband's death became a homicide case. Her husband was a retired senior engineer and was remembered as an intelligent man. She did state in her initial interview that her and her husband took the fish tank cleaner mixed with soda. She also had a previous assault case against her husband several months after she initially married him. Trump would go on to announce that he is taking hydroxychloroquine himself. On April 6th, after tense negotiations with 3M, the company agreed to import 166.5 million N95 masks from their factory in China over a 3-month period. On April 14th, Donald Trump halted funding to the World Health Organization and asserts that the organization severely mismanaged and covered up the spread of the coronavirus. On that same day, it is falsely reported that Donald Trump was demanding his signature on stimulus checks, a move that could result in checks being delayed by a few days. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin stated in a televised interview that he came up with the idea of putting Donald Trump's name on the checks, but only having it in print. It reportedly does not delay the processing of checks. On April 16th, the president announced guidelines for opening America back up. The plan is criticized as testing is not sorted out. The counter-argument is that without working towards reopening, the economy and unemployment rate could skyrocket. On April 20th, Donald Trump stated he will be signing an executive order to temporarily suspend immigration to the United States. It is announced the next day that immigration will be suspended. On April 21st, the Senate put together a bill to provide additional stimulus for small businesses, coronavirus testing, and hospital support. On April 23rd, Donald Trump wondered in a press conference if UV light or a disinfectant may be able to be used on or in the body in some way to combat the virus after a presentation of a study that found sun exposure and cleaning agents can kill the virus when lingering on surfaces. During the press conference, he refers to these ideas not being checked, but that research into a form of methodology surrounding these ideas is going to be conducted. Many headlines ran in light of this that state that Trump recommended ingesting disinfectants to fight the virus. Donald Trump later stated the questions were being made sarcastically towards reporters. On June 5th, the president announced he intended to ask Congress for more economic stimulus and a payroll tax cut. On June 22nd, the president signed a proclamation that suspends the entry of foreign nationals as well as their spouses and dependents from June 24th through December 31st of 2020. The ban does not affect foreign nationals that have U.S. visas or other travel documents or those already in the U.S. when the ban took effect. On July 14th, the Trump administration ordered all patient information regarding coronavirus cases as well as all information about available beds and ventilators to go to a central database in Washington as opposed to the Centers for Disease Control. The Department of Health and Human Services database is not open to the public. Concern erupted over how this will affect coordination and research in the medical field and how to better predict and react to the virus. The new system is called HHS Protect and is a collaboration project between the Department of Health and Human Services and the CDC. In a press conference on the 16th, CDC Director Robert Redfield and HHS Chief Information Officer Jose Arrieta stated that this new system merges data from a number of reporting systems and reduces confusion and duplication of how data is submitted from hospitals. They also stated that the information is still available to the CDC and other federal response teams, making the information available to publish to the public as it was before. On August 11th, Moderna Incorporated reached a deal with the Trump administration to supply 100 million doses of its experimental COVID-19 vaccine. Other deals have been made with Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson for vaccines that show promise as well. On August 27th, the Trump administration announced that it is purchasing 150 million COVID-19 rapid tests from Abbott Laboratories to be distributed across the country that will be produced at a rate of 50 million tests a month. On September 2nd, the CDC directed states to start to prepare for possible vaccination distribution as early as late October. Though the information appears to point more strongly to a vaccine being ready later this year or early next year, this does line up with the federal government's goal to have a safe and effective vaccine available for Americans by January of 2021. On September 3rd, the CEO of Pfizer announced on a television interview that it looks like a vaccination may be shown as safe and effective by the end of October, and that their vaccination is currently doing well in Phase 3 clinical trials. On September 9th, Bob Woodward broke a story of a Donald Trump conversation with him on March 19th that he captured via audio that he wanted to downplay the virus to avoid a panic. Donald Trump stated this publicly in a White House press conference already on March 31st. The full text and video of the conversation with the reporter shows that he has made public his concern over the virus without ignoring the facts about it, but that he also wants to be positive about the outlook and chances for the U.S. to instill hope in people while acknowledging the reality of the situation. On October 2nd, the president announced on Twitter that both himself and First Lady Melania Trump tested positive for COVID-19. Speculation has led many, including Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, to believe that Donald Trump and/or others contracted or spread the virus at a September 26th event announcing the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. Masks were not worn at the event, which made Fauci unsurprised that the virus spread. While the criticism might be valid, it should be pointed out that Fauci's recommendations have changed dramatically in relation to guidelines people should be following as the disease has been tracked. In early March, he stated that no one who was healthy needed to think about withdrawing themselves from any activities, including travel in close quarters with others. Fauci also stated in March that people should not be walking around with masks in the United States, as it is not a highly effective preventative measure and that they should be reserved for medical professionals. This does not mean Fauci is being dishonest, but the changing recommendations underscore why many people feel skeptical of the advice coming from public health organizations and officials. Even the CDC has changed messaging on how easily the virus spreads when airborne. The latest information about risk of infection from the CDC also shows that across all age groups, the percentages range from about 1% at the top end to so low it's practically 0%. The CDC has also published information showing that only about 6% of recorded deaths are related to COVID-19 alone, with the vast majority having 2 or more pre-existing conditions or causes of death. Based on the current death toll at the time of recording of 230,176, this puts the number of deaths related to purely COVID-19 at 13,811. Back in July, an analysis published by JAMA Internal Medicine, accounting for deaths in the U.S. between March 1st and May 30th, estimated that deaths reported as being caused by COVID-19 may have been overcounted by as much as 28%. COVID-19 is out there, and it is real, but it is understandable why many may question just how hunkered down and cautious we may need to be, while others feel more abundant caution is necessary. At the end of the day, we are all in this together. Hey there, you've come to the end of the road. That's all I have for this special report. There's so much more that I wanted to cover, but it turns out trying to sum up 4 years of a presidency is a full-time gig. I've got one of those already, and this project has eaten my time up for weeks. I wanted to include my personal opinion after all the information had been presented, but time is of the essence with the election less than a week away. I hope you enjoyed this more balanced look at what the past 4 years have looked like under President Trump, and I hope this helps you make a decision with good information about whether the Donald is a Trump or a Drumpf. I'm St. Stephen, and I love life, and I love you.